In this video, we'll be going over the worst Covenant abilities for either entire classes or specific specs. But starting off at number 10, we'll have a universal ability and the only general one on the list, and that is Fleshcraft, the Covenant ability granted to all classes who join the Necrolords. This is one of the 4 most common abilities, as of course the rest of these abilities on the list are only used by one class choosing one Covenant, except this one. So, the faults of this ability are as follows. First, the fact it requires a 4-second channel time to cast at full power. Second, it is rather weak, unless you use it near bodies. And lastly, the long cooldown, although its duration is just as long. Now, the ability is fine to an extent, but the fact that it requires corpses means during mini-boss fights, you will not be able to get the extra benefit out of it at all. Next, you also have that long channel time, meaning a lot of the time you don't even want to use it during a raid boss. Really, the only fights I could think of where it might be useful are Shriekwing during the dodging phase, maybe Sun King if you are DPS and there's nothing else to do, Blood Council if you get to your dancing spot early, and that's about it. Basically, this spell is only useful in raids to use just before the pull, leading to more spells classes need to shove into their 10-second pull timer in raids. That or use it mid-fight if there's literally nothing to do, which few fights have times like that. Now, there is some use for it in Mythic Plus dungeons because of the constant corpses, but because of how Mythic Plus is timed, it can be annoying to your group if you're off DPSing the next group, and you're spending 4 seconds sitting basically AFK next to a corpse to get a shield. And in Arena, you can use it to start off a match, although oddly in Raided, only after the gates open up, meaning classes that already have to set up, like Warlocks with dropping their portals, may have a hard time getting everything out before getting bursted down by a couple of rogues. Fleshcraft as a main ability has a fair few things that affect it, ranging from armor to soulbinds, and as the ability granted to all Necrolords of every class, it is very important, so it being even slightly bad is a big deal. And luckily, Blizzard is changing it in the upcoming patch of 9.0.5. First, reducing the channel time to 3 seconds, and also it now gives the full benefit of 40%, instead of needing to consume a corpse to max out the shield up to 50%. It will also give you a 30% damage reduction while channeling it, allowing players to use it as both a shield generator and an active mitigation during a fight where you might be taking a big chunk of damage. Lastly, it now consumes corpses passively instead of on use. Each corpse you walk over reduces its cooldown by 1 second. This also changes some of the soulbinds that affect it, like Bonesmith and Plague Doctors. This change should hopefully make it much better, and might even make it better than the others, which grant speed boost, a blink, teleport, and extra healing potions. And at number 9, we have Mage Necrolords, all 3 specs. The Necrolord ability for mages is thematically probably one of the coolest abilities, Deathborne. This is a 3-minute cooldown which transforms the mage into a skeleton Maldraxian after a 1.5 second cast, which lasts for 20 seconds. And that is where the cool part ends. All it does is make your basic spells, Frostbolt, Fireball, and Arcane Blast, hit 2 additional targets nearby, and increase your overall spell damage by 10%. Yeah, for such a cool aesthetic and thematic ability, its mechanics are kind of lame, and that is exactly why it's here. The ability does outclass the other ones when it comes to 2 to 3 target scenarios, but only by a small amount. And because of this super specific scenario being the only time it can even compete with the other Covenants, it leaves this awesome ability down in the bone dust. Especially since for mages, all 3 Nightface soulbinds are really good, while for Necro, there is only 1 good soulbind. Speaking of soulbinds, there is also a conduit to assist it, giving this spell a baseline duration increase of 6 seconds. Decent, but still not good enough, sadly. In 9.0.5, they're going to be increasing the duration to 25 seconds baseline, as well as increasing the spell power buff to 15%. And this might actually make it decent enough to finally see a good amount of use, especially in the upcoming raid if it has a lot of cleave fights. And at number 8, we have the Necrolord Prot Paladin's Vanquisher's Hammer. Now, this Necrolord ability for Paladins throws a hammer at your target instantly at the cost of 1 holy power, with a 30-second cooldown, dealing shadow damage, and for holding protection, empowering your next Word of Glory to activate a special ability. For Holy, it is somewhat usable, although still worse than the others. It is at least playable since it got buffed at one point. For Retribution, it's just right out the lowest DPS of the 3. But for protection, it's another story. While it is the biggest single target DPS increase for prop paladins, it is extremely hard to use because it changes how you use your Word of Glory, altering the uptime of your Shield of Righteousness and putting you over max duration, wasting uptime, making it just feel horrible to play, and alters your tanking play until it just impacts your efficiency. It does get somewhat saved by its conduit, which causes its damage dealt to heal you, and increases its damage done by a baseline of 20%. With 9.0.5, they seemingly want to try and balance it, but the only change coming is it generates 1 holy power instead of spending 1 holy power, which might make it good enough to be used, for holy at least. And at number 7, we move on to the Night Fae ability for Discipline Priests called Fae Guardians, a rather interesting ability. What it does is it calls 3 spirits to help you for 20 seconds on a 1.5 minute cooldown, each doing a different job, commanded by different spells that you cast. And it sounds cool, but in practice, it's just kind of annoying to use. First, the Wrathful Fairies, which is caused by your direct attacks against the target, will restore 0.5% mana or 3 insanity. This one is commanded by your Shadow Word Pain spell. Next, we have the Guardian, which reduces the target's damage taken by 10%, commanded by your Powered Shield ability. And lastly, the Benevolent increases the cooldown recovery of a major ability by 100% following a Shadow Mend or Flash Heal. This ability in reality being the biggest one of the 3 benefits, allowing a 20-second cooldown reduction on a big ability for any one person you want. That is neat on paper, but as I said in practice, it doesn't really go this way. Because if you want to Power Word Shield one person who needs a 10% damage reduction, but then shield another, that buff will move and then go back to the person you wanted on. You'd have to recast on the original, but Power Word Shield can only be cast on a person once every 6 seconds, so you'd have to wait. And that goes with all of these abilities, especially with Shadow and the Wrathful. Having to apply Shadow Word Pain to everything, then make sure the last target you apply to is the focus target, is extremely frustrating and overall ends up being the only Covenant ability for priests that has no immediate effect. It even makes it difficult for Discipline priests on single target to get any of the buffs at full value, especially with how it doesn't combo at all with Spirit Shell stacking and raid healing. You don't actually want to decrease the cooldown of your Spirit Shell because of how it only decreases the cooldown of that one ability, and it's best used when timed with other cooldowns and specific raid mechanics. While it is still somewhat useful at times for Shadow and Holy Priests, it encourages a bad playstyle of not casting spells and worrying if the buff will move to the wrong target. That just makes it overall a bad choice. The conduit for it does actually save the ability somewhat, leaving behind a copy of themselves working at 60% potency when they are moved to a new target for a baseline of around 4 seconds, creating a sort of playstyle where you want to constantly jump these around if you can. But if you're Disc and you want to increase your raid healing, you're at a huge DPS loss taking this over Mind Games from the Venthyr Covenant. In the patch 9.0.5, they are really doing nothing for this ability's issues that it has with Disc Priests, but they are buffing it by a fair bit, which does make it a lot more useful for the other 2 specs. First, increasing the damage reduction to 15%, and increasing the recovery rate to 150%, and causing the Wrathful to instantly go to the closest nearby target when you cast a spell, no longer sitting idle waiting for you to cast your first Shadow Word Pain. That way, you can start gaining mana or insanity a lot more faster. And at number 6, we have Death's Due, the Death Knight Night Fae ability, or more so, the passive. The ability just upgrades your Death and Decay into Death's Due. What the ability does is the same baseline for all 3 specs, the usual shadow damage to targets in the area, then the modifications it gains over Death and Decay has a special ability per spec. For Frost, it causes your Obliterate to hit additional targets and adds a stack of Death's Due. For Blood Death Knights, it causes their Heart Strike to now hit 3 more targets, increasing it to 5 targets hit, and also applying Death's Due. And for Unholy, it causes your Scourge Strike to hit 4 targets, and applying Death's Due. Death's Due is a special benefit of reducing damage enemies deal to you while in the area by 1%, up to 8% per tick of the damage they take, and also granting strength equal to that. So, while a cool ability that plays more to the Death Knight style of place Death and Decay and stand in it to gain a buff, reminiscent of old Pally's standing and consecrate, it sadly is extremely unwieldy and taxing on rotations. And for all the trouble it causes in playstyles, you would think it makes up for it in how good it is, but nope. Because of its hard cap, you barely get any stacks, and in large packs, even possibly drop stacks early, which is especially horrible because the spell is based around an AoE. But if you get too many people in that AoE, it can lead you to being worse off. The conduit for this ain't really good either, only increasing the default damage the ability does, which is not really the big part about it, baseline by 50%. But the base damage is not why you take it, so even with the conduit, it's not good. Although to many DKs, this is a good thing, as I'm sure there's few Death Knights out there who want to run a class of Death and Destruction, and also go Night Fae to match. But with the new patch, that might change, as the damage reduction and strength buff is being increased to 2% per stack, although capping at 4 stacks now, meaning the same max amount per enemy, but you need half as many attacks to get there, making it much easier to get and maintain their stacks. And for number 5, we go to Carrion Rogues for Echoing Reprimand. This 45-second ability costs 10 energy, dealing arcane damage, generating 2 combo points, and causes a combo point to be anima charged for 45 seconds. Damaging finishing moves that consume the same number of combo points as the anima charge function as if they consumed 7 combo points. This anima charge puts a special glow on either your second, third, or fourth combo point, and this makes a very weird minigame as part of your DPS that has you generating combo points to try and line up exactly with the glow indicator, and then spending said combo points. A bit of math on the fly and quick reflexes, especially with random procs. There is of course the cool factor of having your DPS rotation become a minigame of getting to a very specific combo point count, and then spending them, which is almost what you do for your normal rotation. But each time you use the ability, it's different, so having a minigame on top of your normal DPS rotation, altering how your usual rotation works, can put a major wrench in your DPS. This ability is even more annoying for the Outlaw class, which is very unpredictable in its combo point generation. Random combo procs end up lowering your DPS instead of increasing it, and because of this, any rogue who takes this usually ends up ignoring the anima power, and simply just using it on cooldown for the damage it deals and the cheap combo points. When your ability's main focus is completely ignored by the players because it's so annoying and unpredictable, you know something is wrong. The conduit for this ability simply increases its damage by 50%, which I guess is good, since the only reason rogues use it is if they want to use it for the damage itself. And at number 4, we have the Demon Hunter Necrolord ability, Fodder to the Flame. What it does is spawns a demon that will attack you, and can only be hurt by you, and if it's not killed within 25 seconds, it will flee, meaning you did nothing but take some damage for nothing. Maybe the only Covenant ability that can make you worse off than before when you cast it. Killing the demon will drop a greater demon soul. Then, when consumed, will increase all damage by 30% and reduces damage taken by 15% for 20 seconds. Throwing a glaive at it does a lot more damage than normal, about 60% of its health, meaning it's not that hard to kill really. However, with a 2-minute cooldown and just adding more annoyances to a fight, it can be frustrating. Although, something to mention, some good, some bad, the body lasts for 2 minutes, meaning you can use it for fleshcraft, and it counts as a powerful enemy, meaning the shield will be 50% instead of the usual 20%. But there is that while channeling you cannot parry, removing a lot of Vengeance Demon Hunter's defenses, especially since the DPS increase from this does not really matter for them. Also the fact that if you outrange the demon, it will actually evade and run back to wherever it was summoned. So, a cool ability that just really does not play well into the Demon Hunter style, especially since the conduit to buff this ability only buffs the duration of the damage taken and done effect by baseline 1 second. Now, in the patch, they are reworking the ability to become a passive. Your damaging abilities have a chance to summon a demon again for 25 seconds. You throw your glaive and it now instantly kills it. The demon's death causes an explosion that deals damage to nearby enemies, and heals you for 30% of your maximum health. The explosion does have a soft cap of 5 targets though, dealing reduced damage after 5 hits. This rework might actually make the ability a really strong choice in cleave fights, as constant procs of this in a fight that has constant ad spawns, or even Mythic Plus, makes this way stronger of an ability. The only thing being, Demon Hunters gotta be ready to throw their glaive, as Blizzard has made it so you can't macro these demons. No way to choose this mechanic. So we'll see if the conduit also gets changed to something more useful later. Now for number 3, maybe the only Covenant class ability that has 2 buttons, which is the Necrolord ability for warriors. Conqueror Banner's first ability is just this cool little thing where it allows you to have a glowing Maldraxxus banner on your back as just for fun show-off cosmetic ability. So that's cool. Sadly, the actual ability is a little bit too bad to be able to use this fun effect. First, on a 3-minute cooldown, it plants a banner into the ground, giving you and 2 nearby allies 10% crit chance and 20% extra health for 20 seconds. Then it provides you with an extra 1% crit damage buff for every enemy you kill, or for an amount of rage spent, stacking up to 30%, and lasting for 30 seconds. So, while cool in both theme and in playstyle, it does create issues that makes it much weaker solo than in a party, and also requires your allies to be near you, which makes another issue where the banner stays up for those 20 seconds. So if you and your party are forced to move, then it's wasted. And it can be hard to get your allies into that circle to stay in the circle, meaning if you are a lone tank, you will be unable to buff your ranged DPS, and you can't control who it goes onto, meaning the crit chance and the damage, while insane on a Destro lock, might end up on a random holy priest and leveling greens who thinks healing spells have a travel time. The ability does have a beneficial conduit though, where it instantly grants them 5 glory, as well as increasing your strength by 10% baseline while it's planted. In the upcoming patch 9.0.5, they are reworking the ability. On use, it will grant 400 mastery and a 30% increased movement speed to you and 2 nearby allies. It also prevents the 3 of you from having your speed reduced below 100%. It now also lasts for 15 seconds instead of 20, with a 2-minute cooldown instead of 3, and grants you rage per second while active, completely changing the ability to be almost nothing like its original version. For number 2, we move on to abilities that many would say are probably useless, and in some cases even a DPS loss to press. So with that in mind, we have Flayed Shot, the Venthyr ability for hunters. This attack has a 30-second cooldown and costs 10 focus. If fired at an enemy, it causes them to bleed for 14 seconds, and each time it ticks its damage, it has a 10% chance to grant the hunter's Flayer's Mark, which causes their next kill shot to be free and usable on any target regardless of their current health, basically allowing a hunter to use their execute at any percent. Which sounds decent, but in practice, is absolutely horrid damage. First, its actual dot damage that it does is bad. Only a bit higher than a basic ability like Steady Shot, but split over 14 seconds. Second, the fact that it only has a 10% chance to proc each time it deals damage. But wait, it does not deal damage every second. It deals damage every 2 seconds. Per use, you're not even guaranteed to get a free proc of Killshot. Sounds cool in practice, but when it's mathed out, it's actually horrible for hunters in single target DPS for their Covenant abilities. It is, funnily enough, the weakest of them in single target DPS. It does have a conduit to help it though, by increasing the proc chance to 15% and causing your next kill shot to do baseline 5% more damage, but is nowhere near enough to make the spell good. Although the changes coming in the next patch might be good enough. They're going to be increasing the dot duration to 18 seconds, removing the focus cost, and now making it baseline grant your next kill shot a 25% increased damage. This may be enough to make it useful. And at number 1, we have the Warlock spell, Impending Catastrophe. This spell is the Warlock ability granted by the Venthyr Covenant. This ability, after a 2-second cast time with a 1-minute cooldown, fires a cloud of anima at the target, dealing a bit of damage to anything it travels through. Then upon arrival, it explodes, dealing more damage to everything around the target in the form of a dot, while also applying one of 2 Warlock curses. The Curse of Tongues, which reduces cast speed, and Curse of Weakness, which reduces attack speed. These curses will smart cast, meaning it will try to match the curse to the target's type. But we all know many mobs melee and cast spells, and especially players. Do you want it to slow a Ret Pally's heals or his attacks? A player will know, a spell has a hard time knowing, and especially since Warlocks can only cast 1 curse per target. This could remove the curse you already had on them and swapping it to the one that you did not want, like the Warlock's movement speed slow curse, the Curse of Exhaustion. Now, this alone is annoying, but what makes it bad? Well, the fact that this ability is a DPS loss if pressed in single target. It is better to press any other ability than this in a DPS rotation, at least on single target. In AoE situations it has some uses, but overall, it's hilariously horrible. Only Affliction Warlocks get even some use out of it, as it is counted as a dot for them, so they can extend it with Dark Glare and use its proc on Malefic Rupture. This ability also has a conduit that baseline increases its dot duration by 50%, but only on the main target. Do I need to explain how underwhelming that is? In 9.0.5, they are buffing the travel damage by 10%, and the explosion damage by 15%. But even with these buffs, it still won't be worth pressing. Alright, and that's it for worst Covenant abilities. Some of them, as we mentioned, will be reworked. A lot of them, actually. They're going to be buffed in the 9.0.5 patch, so go check out the patch notes. But for most of these abilities, I doubt they will suddenly become the best for their class. Just maybe not as bad as they are now.